Hey everyone, for my final project, I chose to look at African countries by researching significant barriers to disability and how perspectives of the global north and south together are important in defining futurity in these places. Starting with some background and context that pertains to disability. With 54 independent countries, there is a vast diversity of cultures, ecologies, and economies across Africa. Most countries here are considered by the United Nations to be underdeveloped or least developed. There are few nations or areas that have not experienced significant bouts of war or conflict in the last 50 years, if not currently. The effects of war can vary, though impairment and disability are common results. A good example from class that applies here is the Ugandan landmines and their effects both during and post-war. Many regions have also experienced health epidemics, the most known example being the ongoing HIV epidemic that spans the continent. Disease and treatment are both avenues for increased impairment, which is especially true for children. In most northern states of Nigeria, for example, immunization is limited and children are unprotected from illnesses that may result in intellectual impairment. When it comes to perspectives and beliefs of disability, and really just cultures, beliefs, and um, any kind of individuality that can be seen in these countries, there's a lot of variability between them and all of the individual groups of people in them. And no two will believe or experience the exact same things. But there is still an importance in recognizing um, common issues and potential solutions on a larger scale that we'll discuss a little more in a moment. In the same vein, though many nations are underdeveloped, many have addressed disability in policymaking. The most recent leader of this is Uganda, where over the past 20 years, disability has taken an involved role in politics and allowed for the overall success in improving many aspects of how disability is experienced. South Africa also has several laws, policies, and guidelines in place to protect rights of people with disabilities, of which we'll be discussing some later. Colonialism is deeply rooted in and throughout Africa, and disability researchers have been increasingly recognizing the influence of neoliberal constructions, including disability, that persists in these places today. In identifying how colonialism affects many social views, such as the prominence of favoring the productive bodies, there is much value in incorporating decolonialized perspective. Expanding epistemological perspective or perspectives of one country here is thought to influence other countries with similar experiences. One country developing specific contexts and defining disability opens opportunity for others to do the same and, in a way, a framework to do it in light of their shared experiences, rather than through the context left by colonialism. It's because of this that so many countries are observed in this presentation. Though there is much diversity throughout Africa, there are also many shared experiences that will give value to knowledge beyond just those who define it. In very generalized terms, social beliefs of disability across the continent are discriminatory and excluding, and disability is presented with barriers consistently, some of which can't be overcome by individuals alone. To create a more specific understanding, there are two major areas to observe these barriers to disability. First being healthcare accessibility, and the second being employment inclusion. Just like cultures and beliefs, each country differs in its social and medical support systems and its protections of disability. Having many non-developed countries, Africa has experienced many humanitarian and health crises that have disproportionately affected certain regions, nations, or smaller populations. In a study of multiple disadvantaged groups in 4 different countries, specific barriers to healthcare access and their magnitude were determined and compared between the disabled and non-disabled of the group. The groups of each country were selected based on issues that were characteristic of those countries at the time. Internally displaced peoples were observed in Sud, um, excuse me, Sudan. Highly dispersed populations were observed in Namibia. People experiencing resource shortages due to poverty and disease burdens in Malawi, and inequitable healthcare, in South Africa. Lack of transport, availability of services, inadequate treatments, and costs were the four most substantial barriers to healthcare faced across those groups. Those with disabilities also experienced discrimination that their non-disabled counterparts did not, and most importantly, a relationship between the severity of disability and the limitations caused by these barriers was found to be significant. Some of this is explained by the increased medical need that some disabilities may necessitate, or for the need of alternative transport due to physical impairments. Other increases in difficulty were explained by behavioral barriers, though, like discrimination or intolerance because of how disability is perceived, as well as systematic barriers that were simply not inclusive and inequitable. This study intentionally focused on disadvantaged groups. It is not meant to represent all of a group or population, but to discern the intersectional effects of disability within these same settings. For inclusion and the right to work, job discrimination is a common problem, many times even in countries with protections against it. There are often alternative opportunities in place, most usually in the form of sheltered workshops that offer skills training and an opportunity to earn money. However, with many of these workshops being in nations already excluding disability from employment, these workshops tend to fall short. A great example of this is in South Africa, where the sheltered workshop experience has many institutional and attitudinal barriers for disability. These workshops are mostly funded by the government, and there are laws and policies in South Africa that protect the rights of disabled workers, though they are not well followed. Accommodations are often not made in altering tools or equipment for use by those with disabilities, an issue that is common even though it violates a government mandate meant to protect workers from this. Lack of funds contributes to this as well, as proper materials, supplies, and means of production are not always available to workers, and poorly constructed products are a common result. As funding continues to decrease, costs continue to be cut, which is especially difficult for sheltered workshops because there's often little or no funding for disability related programs at all in the first place. These shops are run by non disabled people who often control and direct every aspect of what workers must do, a deprival of decision making in the workplace that is also infringing upon disabled workers' rights to decision according to the country's laws. It was also found that type of disability and degree of disability contributed to this discrimination. And what complicates these issues more is the language barrier that many face, as interpreters often only know their native language and English, but many workers may not know either of them because there is a large number of native languages spoken in the region, so they might not overlap. This also breaks workplace accommodation guidelines established by the law there. Ultimately, worker morale and motivation are both low, and because the attitudinal and language barriers with those running the workshops, workers often rely on each other for support and success in their work, and communication. Another observation is that job skills are not effectively taught in these workshops. With the goal of the shops being skill training for future employment opportunities outside of them, these people working there are essentially set up for failure and ultimately have to continue making what is usually below minimum wage at those workshops indefinitely or becoming unemployed. This failure to provide education valuable for job acquirement compounds with the issue that many children with disabilities um, are still excluded from proper education. And in combining those two, they're ultimately deprived of many of the skills and knowledge that's often essential for job acquisition at all. What makes this topic more relevant is the ongoing international push for Africa to industrialize. Many criticize doing so because they see it as neoliberal globalization and damage to diversity. And countries must have, or countries that industrialize here must have well established and effective policies to protect themselves from suffering economically or having production influenced by the global north in a negative way. On the other hand, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Tanzania have all successfully industrialized and have positively contributed to their economies. They're being used as pretty good examples of how these nations can do this. However, industrialization and the move to more efficient means of production has effects that could influence disability. For one, jobs may be lost in favor of machine work or machine ability, a problem that is already experienced in sheltered workshops. There can also be heightened risk of impairment in certain industries due to improper safety standards or lack of training. Again, another connection to sheltered workshop experiences. For the time being, though, calls for industrialization remain mostly unanswered. And lastly, the push for building epistemic perspectives in theoretical and political discourses counteracts globalization or the globalization caused by coloniality. This is not to say it will counteract industrialism or other influences, though the growth of independent thinking in these ways further separates these countries from the former global north context established through coloniality. Through this, or though this is an important step to take, it is also important to keep modern perspectives in mind. And the same disability theorists I mentioned earlier when first talking about colonialism also noted the importance of maintaining and adapting, the importance of maintaining adaptability for the views held of disability and making sure that they're inclusive while also challenging negative or discriminatory beliefs when they arise, either within their countries or over time as more independence is built between the countries and shared experiences allow them to share knowledge. They can also, in a way, keep each other in check. The CRPD will continue to be a useful tool as the independence of Global South perspectives in disability discourse grows in time. These two together are kind of what interested me to do. This is my presentation, and it was kind of hard to find a lot of information on the, um, the effects on disability by industrialization in these places. There were some resources, and I didn't utilize all of them, but it what drew me in is the excuse me, what what drew me in on this topic was the idea that there is a growing independence and separation of these countries from the global north, while at the same time there is industrialization that is the push from the global north of neoliberal ideas. So I thought it was interesting to kind of look at how that might be handled as we go into the future and how those two kind of different ideas are colliding and in some cases working together, like in those cases of successful industrialization mentioned earlier. And with that, here are my references. Sorry for my little stutters throughout that. But thank you all for the great semester, and